able to move the camera to where it wasn't just over here, so.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for our Modeling and Simulation Seminar Series. We're very proud to have Dr. Pamela Wisniewski from the UCF Computer Science Department. She's here to talk a lot about her work with HCI and social computing. She's also here, hopefully, to attract collaborators. As you can see, someone who's more focused on the behavioral or social side, I think she'll find a lot more collaborators here than in other departments. So I hope you'll welcome her and look for opportunities to talk afterwards.
Great. Well, thank you for coming to my talk today. Like she said, I just started this fall as a new assistant professor in the computer science department. So I'm really excited to be here and reaching out to IST. First, I want to thank Randy and Brian for inviting me to come talk to you, because I think the interdisciplinary nature of IST fits really well with the work that I'm doing. And I think it'll be a good way for me to find, some students who might be interested and collaborators and mentors, and that's really what I'm looking for. So today I'm going to talk about one of my research passions, which is finding ways to help people use technology in a way to help meaningfully engage with others, as well as simultaneously protecting themselves from undue harm. Is there a way to not cut off the top?
Yes.
All right, so just to briefly go over what my talk is going to entail today, first let me give you a little bit more background about myself if you haven't read the flyer. The last 2.5 years before coming to UCF, I was up at Penn State University as a postdoctoral researcher. I was working on an NSF-funded project promoting adolescent online safety. I was actually working with one of the founders of the HCI field, Jack Carroll, so it was a really great opportunity for me. Before that, I obtained my PhD in Computing and Information Systems from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte with a concentration in human-computer interaction. And I also have a master's degree in Decision and Information Sciences from just up the street at the University of Florida. In terms of my experience, I have a diverse background that bridges both academia and industry. For instance, I have about 6 years experience working as a systems developer for both the financial services, I worked at Raymond James, and the medical consulting fields. After that, I've spent a lot of time teaching, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, courses such as human-computer interaction, management information systems, web development, and health informatics. And finally, my research interests lie at the intersection of social computing and privacy. Specifically, I'm interested in how people can leverage interpersonal boundary regulation as a way to optimize their relationships with others online. What I do, however, I call this social privacy because I want to differentiate it from the traditional term of information privacy, which is what we tend to talk about in online or technology contexts. So a lot of the research that I'm going to present today is going to illustrate how I reframe privacy from the traditional research and some of the implications of those findings. And then finally, I want to end my presentation today on some of my ongoing work that I'm doing now in hopes to find collaborators and possibly students to work on some of that with me. So there are a number of different ways that privacy has been conceptualized, from legal definitions to more philosophical ones. When it comes to technology and online context, the prevailing definition of privacy is our information privacy. For instance, making sure that we don't share things such as our passwords and our social security numbers online in a way that could breach our information privacy. Advent of social media, it's surprising that this definition of privacy hasn't changed more to be more interactional in nature, because we're dealing with other people, not just sharing information back and forth. The definition that's often used in my field to define privacy is limiting information disclosures, increasing information control, but thus perpetuating social withdrawal. Given this definition, it makes sense that a lot of researchers have focused on this idea of privacy as a direct trade-off of socially connecting with others online. or the fact that they've looked at privacy as a calculus, where you have to rationalize the cost versus the benefits of disclosing your information in order to reap the social benefits of sharing that information with others. They have also looked at privacy in the terms of it being a paradox, because a lot of research has uncovered that people have high levels of privacy concern, but their actual behaviors don't actually match up with their level of privacy concern. For instance, social networking site users say they're concerned about their privacy, but studies show that they're sharing more information online now within their social networks than ever before. Now, I want to point out some potentially misleading assumptions that can be made if you think about how this research is being framed. First, narrowing the definition of privacy as the binary decision of disclosing or withholding information to others is very limiting, because we're also sharing more complex social interactions with the people in our networks. Finally, putting privacy as a diametrically opposed goal to socially connecting and engaging with others online makes the assumption that we have to give up our privacy if we want to leverage some of these engaging technologies. And then finally, we assume, well, if people have high levels of privacy concern, but they're still engaging in social network and social media, then they must be somehow acting irrationally, and we need to rectify this behavior. So this has actually created a major tension in my field between the HCI privacy researchers and the social media researchers, because both of them have found that, well, privacy is a good thing, but social media research has also found that there's benefits from connecting with others online. This tension is also carried over to the social media giants and the social network, social media users. For instance, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has stated that, that sharing is the new social norm. Not only this, he said that people have really gotten comfortable not only sharing more information and different kinds, but more openly and with more people. He goes on to say that this is a social norm. But what the key thing is, he says that we view it as our role in the system to constantly innovate and update what our system is to reflect this social norm. And so Zuckerberg has come up with terms such as frictionless sharing, where by default he's trying to get us to share more instead of making more conservative privacy decisions. According to Zuckerberg's own Facebook profile, he says, "I'm trying to make the world a more open place by helping people connect and share." A key assumption that Zuckerberg is making here is that openness and sharing equate to more meaningful and plentiful human relationships. Empirically, however, based on some of the backlash we've seen from users and media, this might not necessarily be the case. For instance, Oxford Dictionary chose unfriend as its word of the year in 2009. Thanks to comedian Jimmy Kimmel, we are now celebrating our 6th annual National Unfriend Day, with his stance being that social media is cheapening friendship. Others have stated that online friendship can be characterized as brief and tangential, where we're surrounded by all of these friends, but we lack true connection. Do you agree with some of that? Okay. So if unbounded sharing isn't the key to enhancing our online relationship with others, we have to ask the question, well, what is? To try to answer this question in my dissertation research, I actually went back to the works of Dr. Erwin Altman. He's a social psychologist who does work in environmental design for social behavior. Dr. Altman says that we should attempt to design responsive environments which permit easy alternation between a state of separateness and a state of togetherness. Environments that emphasize only either very little interaction or a great deal of interaction, such as Facebook, will be too static and not responsive to changing privacy needs. Okay, so it's here where you're probably going to stop me and say, well, wait a minute. How does privacy help us enhance our online relationships with others? Well, The way that Altman conceptualizes privacy is as an interpersonal boundary regulation process that serves to optimize our interaction. For example, if you get too close to somebody too soon, sir, what's your name?
Jack.
Hi, Jack. I'm making Jack feel really uncomfortable right now, right? That can be as detrimental as socially isolating oneself from others. So Altman's seminal work was to identify the different boundary mechanisms that humans use in order to regulate these interpersonal boundaries. Some of them are personal space or physical distance, eye contact, or body language. So one thing is, when did Altman write his work? Was Facebook, MySpace even around back then? No. So the problem with some of these boundary mechanisms is that they don't readily translate into virtual environments. So my goal in my research for my dissertation was to see how Altman's conceptualization of privacy could be applied to the context of social networks. With this goal, I wanted to see if we could use interpersonal boundary regulation as a way to optimize relationships within these environments. Some of the research questions that I ask in my work then are, what types of interpersonal boundaries do we have to manage online, and how do the different users do this? Is privacy really a trade-off we have to make to connect socially with others online? And how can we effectively engage with others online while mitigating privacy-related risks? Okay? So I've studied this in two different contexts so far. For my dissertation work, it was adult social networking site users. And for my postdoc, I was looking at more teens between the ages of 13 and 17 and how they use social media. So high-level overview of the results I'm presenting today that shows you how my research reframes privacy is that I'm going to show you how privacy goes beyond simply the information we choose to share or not share within our networks. How it's not a paradox, because different people manage it in different ways, and there are factors that affect how different people. And so it's not that we're just not acting on our stated beliefs, it's a more complex process. It's also not a zero-sum game where you have to give up your privacy in order to socially engage with others. Some of my research has actually found that achieving the privacy level that you desire is actually related to higher levels of social connection. And then finally, a lot of my work has looked at how it's a complex social process where it goes beyond this binary decision of disclosure or not, and it helps us optimize how we engage with others in a constant negotiation process. So some of my earlier work was to try to understand those different types of boundaries and the mechanisms we use within social networks to manage some of those interpersonal boundaries. So what I did was I combined two qualitative methodologies to understand this phenomenon better. First, I did a feature-oriented domain analysis using analyzing the interfaces of 5 popular social networking sites. These included Facebook, MySpace, LinkedIn, Ning, and High5. I did this to compare and contrast the different interface affordances that were available for use within these sites to understand what mechanisms were available to us explicitly through the interfaces. Then I conducted 21 end-user interviews of people who use social networks to ask them generally how they manage their relationships with others online, and then some of the interpersonal conflicts that arose as they tried to do this. So through this research, I was able to create a taxonomy of 10 different distinct types of interpersonal boundaries that users manage within their social networks that are in 5 separate categories. The first category is our disclosure boundaries. This represents, first, the more traditional privacy boundary of the self-disclosures we make to others, or the personal information we share about ourselves online. However, this also goes beyond that to look at some of the unintended disclosures by our confidants. For instance, one of our participants, I'll call her Dolly, she decided to close her Facebook account because during her first trimester, one of her friends innocently congratulated her on her pregnancy. think that was a bad thing. She hadn't told anybody yet. So it wasn't a matter that she was disclosing or not disclosing the information. It was actually somebody within her network doing this for her. Next, we have relational boundaries, because social networks are directly related to friend-based privacy, meaning that what we share is directly proportional to whom we're connected. So we make relationship connection boundary decisions on, well, Steve is my Facebook friend, but are we really friends? Well, you know, he's somebody I want to work with, so I sent him a friend request and he actually accepted, so we're Facebook friends now. But there's also relationship context, where do you think that I'm going to interact with Steve on Facebook the same that I would with my husband? Probably not. Next, we have network boundaries. For instance, the ability to discover others through somebody else's network. How many of you have hidden your connections on LinkedIn, especially when you're searching for jobs? Nobody in here? Well, for other people in industry, it makes a bigger difference because, for instance, a headhunter could be looking for somebody to hire for a job, and instead of reaching out to you, they can look at the homophilia in your network to see who you know who's better than you and pass you up for a job offer. So a lot of people choose to hide these network connections because people try to benefit from them. Another thing that exists are network intersection boundaries. For instance, have you had two unrelated groups of friends on any of your social media somehow just combust into this political debate on your page? A lot of our users have that. And it also depends who you are and who you let in your circles. Next, we have territorial boundaries, because even though we don't have physical spaces, we do have spaces that kind of represent certain levels of ownership. For instance, we have our outward-facing territories, such as our Facebook timeline or wall, where this is an external view of what people can see about us. However, the one that people say they get violated their boundaries most often is their inward-facing territories, such as their Facebook newsfeed, because people complain that they see content that's inappropriate, or somebody's posting a political statement that they strongly disagree with, or somebody's trying to sell Amway or body wraps. And this is taking their personal resources, and even though this is an external view, it is a boundary violation of sorts. And then finally, we have interactional boundaries of when we allow others to have direct access to us. For instance, have you ever been on an instant messenger program or on Facebook and somebody sent you a message in real time, like a PM or something, and you're like, oh crap, I don't want to talk to them right now, so you just close out quietly, hoping that they just assume that you didn't see their message before you logged out? Okay. So those are the types of interactional boundaries, and then blocking is the most severe one, where we don't even want this person to be able to find us in the search results. And this tends to be a drastic measure that people only take after a violation has already occurred. So as you can see, the boundaries that we manage within our social networks and social media go far beyond just the personal information we disclose about others. Along with this taxonomy, I also found some other interesting emerging themes. First, SNS users manage multiple types of interpersonal boundaries across those 10 types, and many of these boundaries for privacy are social, not just informational. For instance, I may feel pressure or peer pressure to accept a friend request from somebody that I don't really want to share my information with. How do I manage that? Also, boundary setting strategies vary based on personal preference. For instance, there's some users who use their social network as a business platform. These included one dating coach that I interviewed, and 2 photographers, and 1 book author. And the way that they manage their relationship connection boundaries is by doing blanket accepts of all friend requests, because any person who contacts them could be a potential client or fan. The way they manage their privacy then becomes through self-censorship. One person actually said, well, I don't post anything out on my social networks that I wouldn't post on a public website. In contrast, Dolly, who was an interesting participant, a single mother, she said that she only lets in friends and actually very intimate friends. She won't accept requests from coworkers or family members because there are just too much drama. As a result of that, Dolly said, well, because I keep my network small, I can post whatever I damn well please. So these are different strategies that different users use to manage their privacy boundaries. Sometimes, however, there's boundaries to boundary management. For instance, people feel uncomfortable putting a boundary up, like accepting a friend request seemed to be the norm, and it was also socially more acceptable within the request itself. On Facebook, MySpace, all of them, they overemphasize accept request. There's not anything that says like unfriend, right? Even though we call it unfriend, it's just remove, delete, quietly ignore, because we have this kind of positive politeness bias that we're rude if we put these boundaries out. Also, users lacked awareness that some of these features even existed. For instance, before Google Plus was launched, did you know that Facebook had a way to limit your posts to certain friend groups? They did, but most users didn't know that because it was kind of de-emphasized in the interface. Well, with the launch of Google Plus, Facebook made that more apparent to their users to know that that was available to them as well. And then other controls were inflexible or too difficult to use. So there was a disconnect between the interface affordances that were provided to users and how they wanted to use them. So as a result, social interactions through social networks frequently caused unintentional conflict and emotional distress, which invoked users to enact coping mechanisms, such as having a Facebook account with a pseudonym, or even having an account that they deactivated every time they logged out, or finding other ways to manage their boundaries because they didn't feel like the interfaces were doing their jobs. Okay. So after having more understanding of the phenomenon of boundary management, one of the things that I wanted to do was confirm some of these findings. First, qualitatively, I saw that, well, it seems like users have different strategies for managing their privacy. But can we quantitatively verify these types of patterns? To be able to do this, I did a survey of 314, it's a web-based survey of 314 Facebook users. I asked each of them to log into their Facebook account with a series of screenshots and directions to navigate to different privacy settings or features and report their current settings or their or the frequency of certain behaviors. For instance, how often you hide somebody from your newsfeed. Once I collected this data, I also asked them whether or not they remember that feature or had known about it. So I measured their level of feature awareness. So I did a structural equation model to understand the relationship between feature awareness and their actual behavior. And in the most part, feature awareness was a very strong influence on the actual behaviors that they took, which isn't a surprise, but it does help unpack that seeming paradox between people's privacy concerns and their actual behaviors. Because if you think about it, if somebody doesn't know that a feature exists, they're not going to use it. Okay? The next thing I did was a mixture factor analysis to create user classes based on the different privacy behaviors that people exhibited. Because there was a multidimensional level of behaviors that I wanted to understand, okay, well, in what combination did people do these behaviors and at what levels? So we ran the MFA and we found 6 classes of users that included what we labeled as selective sharers, privacy minimalists, balancers and maximizers, self-censors, time savers, and consumers. So this is a web graph that compares the privacy maximizers to the selective sharers and the self-censors. The balancers and the minimalists just tended to be concentric circles that varied with intensity, whereas these had some distinct patterns that I want to point out. So maximizers are this circle here, where generally they took a good portion of all of the different privacy behaviors. However, if you compare that to selective sharers, they had a more unique pattern, where these people, they often limited access control, restricted their chat. They did a lot of friend list management, grouping people on different friend lists, and then actually selectively sharing based on those friend groups. You see here, they do the friend list management and the selective sharing more frequently than the maximizers. Okay? We compare the selective sharers to the self-censors, we see a very different story. These people decidedly don't do friend list management, nor do they do selective sharing, but instead, they tended to manage their privacy purely by withholding. For instance, limiting access control, withholding the basic information from their profile, not putting it on there at all, and withholding all contact information. Okay? So, if we is just information privacy, we would consider these people as the privacy maximizers, really, and these people as the more open and sharing ones, even though they're both taking measures to ensure their privacy. So some of the key implications of these findings are that all social networking site users are not created equal. Well, what does that mean? That means, one, that this gives us opportunities to do privacy personalization and also use intelligent interface design to either nudge people towards different privacy behaviors or support their existing privacy behaviors depending on what your goal is. Also, privacy behaviors have a strong association with feature awareness. So in the cases where there's low awareness, this might be an opportunity to pinpoint education that needs to be done, to show people things like the privacy dinosaur in Facebook so they know how to manage their privacy settings. But in cases where the awareness of a feature is high, but the behavior is low, this might signal an opportunity for redesign because this feature might not meet current users' needs. All right, so after that study, I wanted to set out to challenge. I just like to challenge things, I guess. I like to play the devil's advocate role. That assumption that you have to give up your privacy in order to socially connect with others. The way that I tackled this was through another web-based survey where I asked users to report on their different levels of desired privacy across those 10 different boundaries in that taxonomy, as well as what they felt their actual or achieved privacy level was. I went back to Altman's definition of optimal privacy being meeting one's privacy needs. And so I came up with this privacy fit model. Here, in red, these are the people who said that they desired a high level of privacy and that they achieved it, whereas the people in blue are what Altman calls are socially crowded, meaning that they wanted high levels of privacy, but they felt like they did not achieve it. Okay? And then in green, these are the people who said that they didn't want high levels of privacy, and that's what they got, so a privacy fit. And then finally, the purple group here is the social isolation group, which on Facebook you don't have much social isolation, I guess, because the numbers were very low. So here, these are the people who wanted low levels of privacy, but felt they actually achieved a high level of privacy. So due to statistical analysis, we had to drop the social isolation group because there just wasn't enough participants in that group to analyze that part of the data, and proposed the following structural model. Well, based on Altman's conceptualization of privacy as a way to optimize social interactions by achieving your desired level of privacy or meeting your privacy needs, I hypothesized that privacy fit, regardless if you wanted a lot of privacy or a little, was associated with higher levels of social connectedness than if you had a misfit or not a privacy fit or were socially crowded. However, I also hypothesized a moderating relationship of Facebook use because individuals who are very avid users of Facebook might use dissonance theory or some other like habituation because they're on Facebook all the time and maybe privacy doesn't matter to them as much. And I tested this model across all 10 of the different boundary types from the taxonomy. The results were actually quite surprising. There was a strong effect, there was a moderating effect of Facebook use where for all conditions of low Facebook use, there was a strong effect of privacy fit. Meaning if you don't use Facebook that much, privacy tends to matter to you more when it comes to socially connecting with others. What I didn't anticipate finding was that even in cases for avid Facebook users, a lot of times privacy fit still also mattered. So let me explain these graphs to you. Here, we dichotomized it into low use and high use. And then we did a comparison to the social crowding condition as the baseline, okay? This shows that the matched with low desired and low actual is significantly higher for social connectedness than the baseline. This was true for 1, 2, 3 of the different boundary types, okay? However, as we moved on, I found other models where it was also true that privacy fit for individuals with a high level of desired privacy also yielded higher levels of social connectedness. Moving on, I found that was even true in the case for relationship connection for Facebook users who used Facebook often. So it wasn't necessarily that, and this was for individuals who desired large and open relationship connections and felt that they got it. That was better than not wanting a large network and having it, okay? And then here for relationship context, we actually found a significant relationship for if you were able to maintain the appropriate relationship context that you wanted, and that was more high level, that was actually significantly higher than not being able to do that within your social network. And then finally, for interactional disabling, being able to tell people, okay, leave me alone, I don't want you to contact me right now, for all cases of privacy fit, were associated with higher levels of social connectedness than that condition of where we have to give up our privacy in order to be socially connected, okay? So really the assumption that we have to give up our privacy or be socially crowded in order to connect fell short because in most of these conditions, the privacy fit condition was more strongly, significantly associated with higher levels of social connectedness. Okay, so the implications from this study, I know the graphs are a little confusing outside the context of the paper, is that privacy does not have to be this zero-sum game where we have to either give up our privacy or give up our social connectedness. We can actually work towards achieving our privacy and still gaining social connectedness with others. So meeting an end user's privacy needs, user-centered design, can actually enhance social connection instead of impede it. And then that goes along with what Altman originally said, was that SNS interface design should be responsive to an individual's changing privacy needs. Okay? And this also talks to the fact that privacy in and of itself shouldn't be treated as an absolute. A lot of privacy researchers tend to assume that privacy is good. The more private you are, the better. But for some people, they might actually want less privacy and more social connected. Okay. They might need social support. And so when we make those normative judgments about the person who's posting about their personal life and saying, oh, that person's using Facebook like a diary, we're not necessarily being thoughtful of the goals that that person has in mind. So my research tends to advocate more for user-centered privacy instead of trying to promote privacy as an absolute. And then the majority of my research, once I went over to my postdoc, was looking at privacy in terms of it being a social process. So my dissertation work, working with adults, gave me this appreciation that, okay, privacy, boundary regulation is a social process. I truly did not understand or appreciate how complex that process could be until I started working with parents and teens. So, for instance, there's a very big conflict between privacy and safety in online context. For instance, the parents who value their teen's safety more tend to be more draconian and authoritarian in trying to restrict their teens' online usage and protect them from the dangers of being online. Whereas the parents who valued their teens' privacy more and didn't want to invade their personal space or their technology use, these parents tended to be more indulgent, saying, well, I trust my teen to do what's right online, and I just hope for the best. Of course, there's this kind of Goldilocks sweet spot in the middle, right, where a parent can be engaged and also allow their teens to engage online. Okay, so what I found when I first started this project is that they tended to take that privacy calculus approach of saying, well, if teens don't share any information online, then that won't put them at risk and that will keep them safe. Therefore, I saw a lot of models that I would consider the abstinence-only approach, where the dependent variable was the online risk, such as disclosing personal information online, and the whole goal of the model was to minimize this dependent variable. How can we get teens to stop sharing information online so that we can protect teens? What do we know about abstinence-only approaches? They don't work for everybody, right? Okay. So again, what I did, I went back to psychology, this time to developmental psychology, and I found a framework for resilience in the face of risks. This model of resilience actually looks at it from a more realistic perspective. So this model was typically applied to risk-taking behaviors in teens for sexual promiscuity, alcohol use, substance abuse, not online context. So that's how I applied it here. So this view moves away from the abstinence-only approach and moves it away from privacy being a way to prevent risk to a way to manage the risks possibly once they occur. One of the most interesting statement that I read about resilience is that you can't have resilience without exposure to risk. If you are well adjusted and you've had no risks, that doesn't mean you're resilient, that means you're lucky, right? And that was like a really eye-opening point to me because I wanted to start understanding how teens coped with some of these risks that they encountered because truthfully, I'm a believer that being exposed to online risk is going to be inevitable for all teens to some level, and we have to prepare them for that. So when I first began to study the phenomenon of parental mediation, teen risk-taking, and risk-coping behaviors, I did this through an analysis, a secondary analysis of an existing Pew Research data set of 588 parents and teens. So because this was more exploratory, we tested the paths between all of the different constructs in this model to find what paths were significant and what weren't. And so on this final model, you'll see a line, and if you see a relationship or a line between these boxes, it means there was a significant relationship. But also, if you don't see a line, it means there was not, okay? So some of the interesting things we found in this model were that parental privacy concern was related to both active mediation, talking to their teens about what they were doing online, and direct intervention, meaning trying to take over what the teen was doing, setting up their privacy settings, and doing it kind of for them, the more draconian approach, restrictive. That in itself wasn't so surprising, and the fact that parental privacy concern was related to teen privacy concern, again, wasn't all that surprising. But the different effects of active mediation and direct intervention were kind of enlightening. Direct intervention was negatively associated with basic disclosures. So a teen posting basic information such as their name on social media. So this is like not necessarily a risky action. This is like a teen typically posting basic stuff online. So teens tended to do less basic disclosures. The other thing we found were that the risk-taking behaviors seemed to have this escalation risk pattern, where basic disclosures were related to more sensitive disclosures, like posting pictures or videos that have them in them. And then the sensitive disclosures were related to more risky interactions, such as sharing their location or sharing something more regrettable. So here, the direct intervention kind of prevented this risk escalation pattern from getting kicked off, whereas the active mediation was related to more sensitive disclosures. Now, because this is cross-sectional data, we can't assume a causation pattern here because it's all a correlative model. But the two narratives are that, well, when parents actively mediate their teens, then they make more sensitive disclosures, which would kind of be like, okay, they're rebelling, right? Or what could be happening here is more of a reactive parenting approach, where when parents see that their teens are making more sensitive disclosures, like your teenage girl posting a picture of herself in a bikini, then parents are reactively, actively mediating their teens to say, hey, maybe you should take that picture down, okay? And we felt like that was a more realistic way to express this relationship in this model. The other thing that was interesting is that teen privacy concern, unlike parents who don't want their teens to post anything, it didn't seem to be triggered until it got to this level of risky interactions. Because there wasn't a relationship between teens' privacy concerns for their sensitive disclosures or basic disclosures. It was only once it had reached that higher risk threshold. But then once teens' privacy concern was triggered, it seemed to also show that it triggered advice-seeking behaviors, like, okay, well, what should I do about this? And then corrective or remedy behaviors, such as deleting a photo or blocking a person, okay? So teens actually were doing risk coping behaviors to protect themselves more retroactively. The relationship the parental mediation strategies had was quite interesting as well, where the direct intervention was actually negatively correlated to teens' remedy or corrective behaviors. A hypothesis that I have here is, well, these teens are the ones who aren't even disclosing their basic information online. Therefore, they don't ever get to the point of needing to do remedy or corrective behaviors. Whereas the active mediation was positively related to teens taking some more protective behaviors in their social networks. So it's a pretty complex relationship between parents and teens and what's going on what teens share and do online. Looking at these interaction graphs, you also see that there's a little bit of a suppressive effect of direct intervention used alone by a parent, where when a parent has uses direct intervention, teens on average use social networking sites less than they do when the parent uses both active mediation and direct intervention. So the parents who are just the ones who are saying, I'm going to take control and not give you any level of autonomy, are the ones who have the teens who aren't going online as much. Whereas the parents who are being more engaged and who are actively mediating their teens' internet use, there's more of an empowering effect where these teens are actually going online more often and have more complex networks. All right. So after doing the secondary analysis, I wanted to collect some of my own data to better understand some of the more in-depth complexities of these relationships. Because what I've seen in the past literature is that most of them are in this large Gallup poll research of asking teens yes or no questions, or have you ever experienced this online? Instead, I wanted to contextualize it more. So I did a 2-month dyadic diary study of parents and teens, where I had a separate login for parents and teens, and they both they participated in the study. They took a pre-survey and a post-survey, and they made each 8 weekly diary entries. In these diary entries, I asked parents and teens whether the teen had experienced any of 4 different risks within that week. Those risks included information privacy breaches, sexual solicitations, online harassment or cyberbullying, and exposure to explicit content. Now, mind you, because they had separate logins, the reports from the parents obviously did not match the reports from the teens, but in and of itself, that was actually a pretty interesting finding. I also did a dyadic survey similar to the diary study, but more of a cross-sectional just to get larger numbers for more analysis that I haven't done yet. In these surveys, I used mixed methods where I had Likert scale measures and perceived measures, as well as open-ended diary questions such as what happened, how did you deal with this, or was the issue resolved? So when I started looking at the preliminary diary results, I was a little concerned because I was kind of honing in on some of those really risky events. Oops. For instance, I had one 15-year-old girl say that she met a stranger online who asked her to meet up with him, and he gave her alcohol. And the mother knew of this, so we didn't have to report it through mandated child reporting. And he actually raped her. I had another girl who said that her boy at school asked her to send photos of herself to him, and she did. And then she expressed suicidal thoughts because he shared those pictures with all of her schoolmates, who then cyberbullied her. And we had to contact the mom to let the mom know, because the girl had told the mom, or the mom had found out, that the girl said that she sent a fake naked picture of herself to a boy and was being cyberbullied. But she did not express the suicidal thoughts to her mom, so we had to do that as mandated reporters to let her know. So looking at this, results from 15-year-old, 14-year-old girls, as well as some of the other data collected, I was thinking, wow, maybe we should just shut the internet off for teens. Delving into the data a little bit more, and I saw some promising things. For instance, I first looked at a lot of these studies just assume that the exposure to online risk is a negative thing instead of actually testing any kind of negative outcome from it. So I first established a model that showed that internet addiction, which is related to negative affect, we've already known this from the literature, but we looked at the pre-survey data and confirmed that online risk exposure partially mediates this relationship, meaning that teens who are addicted to the internet are more likely to be exposed to online risks, which then explains some of the negative affect that they receive because of this exposure. Now, this isn't the good news. This is the good news, okay? So when you take that resilience framework from the resilience theory that I talked about earlier and treat it as a moderating factor to these negative experiences, there's actually a significant effect both between internet addiction and between online risk exposure and negative affect. And these are the interaction graphs. So according to resilience theory, there's a protective reactive effect of resilience between internet addiction and exposure, where teens who, even if they're highly addicted to the internet, but report higher levels of resilience, actually experience less risk exposure. And here there's actually a stabilizing effect of resilience. For teens, even when they're highly exposed to risks online, if they consider themselves highly resilient, then that actually neutralizes the negative affect that they perceive from that event. So here's an example. Two teens see the same pornographic image. One teen could respond by being traumatized by it or having it be a gateway to a porn addiction or some other negative effect. The other teen might see it and be like, okay, that's annoying, that's no big deal, and move on. And so even though different teens are exposed to the same experiences, how they cope with it makes a difference in their long-term effects from it. Okay. Then the next study that I did was delving into some of those qualitative responses from the teen diary entries. And the results actually came out even more positive than I thought. So out of 207 risk events that were reported by about 68 teens during the course of 2 months, 57% of the reports were exposure to explicit content because it was 2.5 times more frequent than any of the other risk types. And for the most part, it was accidental. There were a few teens who had porn addictions and said that they looked at porn and did other things with the porn on a weekly basis. But for the most part, it was, hey, this ad popped up on Google, I had to close it out. Or there was this Vine that somebody posted that was inappropriate, I had to block the person. 85% of the teens did not intentionally seek out the experiences that they reported. 47% took active measures to fix the problem, such as changing their privacy settings, blocking a person, telling a person who asked them to send a naked picture, no. And then 17% of the reports were too insignificant to require any resolution. I actually had to change the prompt on the diary study because I asked, do you feel like this problem was resolved? And some of the teens started reporting, this isn't a problem. This is what I see on the internet every day. And so I had to change it as like, do you feel like this incident or issue, I don't remember the word that I ended up using, was resolved, to be able to get teens to say, well, yeah, it was resolved, or no, it wasn't really even a big enough deal to do anything about it. And then 87% of the reports were low to medium risk events that didn't really pose any kind of imminent risk to the teens. But the cool thing was that these risk experiences, when you asked them how they dealt with them, it showed that they were learning some good interpersonal boundaries. For instance, no, I'm not going to send you a naked picture. When they see explicit content of another girl self-harming herself, posting comments on that girl's post to say, hey, stay strong, you're beautiful, don't do that. Empathy. So without some of these risk experiences, these teens might not have been able to exercise some of these more positive interpersonal boundary setting skills, such as, hey, I don't like that picture of myself, can you untag me or remove it? To the more empathetic things, such as supporting somebody who was being cyberbullied. So, kind of take the 50-foot view again of how my research has reframed privacy. Is I showed you how privacy goes beyond just simply the information we disclose about ourselves, to what others disclose about us, to the relationships that we're managing online. Our privacy and how we manage it, it's not a paradox. We just have different processes, and as different users, we have different ways of managing it. And we need to be insightful of this as designers. And then finally, privacy is a very complex social process. I found that teens handle their privacy behaviors much different than adults, where adults do have a more rational, like, I'm concerned about privacy, so I might not share the information, where teens tend to take the risk and then do something about it retroactively. And trying to understand some of these things, such as the risk-taking and risk-coping behaviors, is really important instead of just trying to view privacy as a way to prevent online harm or risks. So in terms of my future research directions, I'm still interested in staying at this intersection of helping people both connect through technology as well as helping protect them from some of the unintentional or sometimes intentional consequences of engaging with others through technology. For instance, I'm in the process of trying to build a better mobile app to protect teens from some of the things that they're being exposed to online. If you think about it from a value-sensitive design approach, you say that mobile apps that are designed for parental monitoring promote more draconian, authoritarian parenting, of restriction and monitoring, or do you think that they promote more authoritative parenting styles, such as talking to your teen and knowing what they're up to be able to say, hey, can I talk to you? Is there something you need me to help you with? Has anybody downloaded a parental monitoring app? A lot of these apps are built so that they promote monitoring, where they show the teen's browsing history, where they send the parent a teen's every text message that they send. including the, hey, you're hot, I think you're hot, all the way to the, oh crap, that's a naked picture of my daughter. Now, if you had that on your phone, anybody have a teenage daughter? Would that drive you nuts as a parent? Well, it's also very privacy invasive to the teen, and it's not doing much to promote teen autonomy to help teach them how to do more appropriate behaviors online. So what if we abstract some of these things and instead kind of use a control chart where if we can intelligently detect some of the riskier behaviors, like that naked picture, or if we can nudge teens to make more smarter choices. I'm smart, SMRT. No, that's appropriate for Homer, right? All right. Then maybe we can help teach teens how to use technology and be digital online citizens as they grow up, instead of having it be where I'm the parent, I'm going to restrict, I'm going to protect you from this thing called the internet until you're an adult. I'm also interested in looking at the efficacy of the existing online safety interventions that are out there, because the research community, we keep focusing on prevalence. Like, oh my gosh, 1 out of 10 teens are cyberbullied. We haven't moved to the interventions yet, but there's a lot of nonprofit organizations out there that have been providing different intervention programs. But when I talk to most of them, they say, well, we just are hoping that these are helping teens and parents. There's not any kind of evidence-based approach to really assess the efficacy of these programs. So if the researchers can partner with these industry partners who have actually developed the interventions and take more of an evidence-based approach to say, okay, these are vetted and these are ones that we should promote or whatever, or find ways to do better instructional design using technology or even just in classrooms, middle schools. Figuring out ways to get teens and parents the information that they need. For instance, letting parents know, what Snapchat is or what Kik is. And what ways can we use technology to help do this as well? Not, building better blockers so no porn gets through, but maybe building something that detects behavior of pattern use of like a pornography that's violent over time and their frequency. Instead of just, hey, the teenage boy who's 13 who just pulled up this pic. And then I have a whole bunch of other projects going on. For instance, I have that dyadic cross-sectional data set of 215 parents and teens that I still haven't had a chance to analyze. I'm currently writing a paper from the Diary study on comparing when a parent understood when their teen was experiencing an online risk and when they didn't. I think only about 12% of the time did a parent report match a teen report about one of the online risks. And one of the most interesting things that I'm going to report in this paper is that the reason that teens aren't going to you for help is because what teens think is that they're going to get in trouble, even if it's not something that was their fault, because there's this freak out factor that parents have, where, hey mom, I just saw a picture of this guy's, what? And the parent, instead of saying, okay, let's go and change your settings or let's block that person, the parent freaks out and says, oh my gosh, you're going to get off of Facebook. You're not allowed on there ever again. So teens are dealing with their online experiences with risks by themselves. Okay. I'm also doing a study right now on understanding the launch of Facebook reactions, trying to understand how that changes the level of perceived support that we get in our social network. Will it make people lazier and give empathy through a button click than saying, I'm so sorry for your loss, because now we have a more appropriate response? I'm participating in the REU site project for Internet of Things, trying to understand some of the adoption motivations and the barriers to adoption, which privacy is a big one. And then I'm also doing a project right now on patient-centered technologies looking at assistive technologies for dementia caregivers. Now, you would think that this is like a far cry from the research that I've been doing elsewhere, but if you think about it, parents monitoring teens to keep them safe, caregivers monitoring their older loved ones to keep them safe. There's a lot of that same privacy and safety issues. If the dementia patient is in the milder stages, they're not going to want a security camera in their bathroom. So what are some of the ways that we can build privacy-enhancing technologies that can also promote safety? Okay. I'm always open to other collaborations as well, because I'm a new faculty member here, and I would love to one day be able to ride on the coattails of giants who are bigger than me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
So first, really interesting and innovative work. How has